Podcasting is more than just talking. It's listening. BSing with Bob Schmidt.
This week on the BS with Bob Schmidt podcast, part 2 of our conversation with best-selling author Stephen Woessner. He wrote the book Profitable Podcasting, Grow Your Business, Expand Your Platform, and Build a Nation of True Fans. Marketer, entrepreneur, and friend of mine, Stephen Woessner, my guest on the BS with Bob Schmidt podcast. Writing the book Profitable Podcasting, Grow Your Business, Expand Your Platform, and Build a Nation of True Fans. Have you been able to do that, grow a nation of true fans?
Yeah, and it's absolutely the result of the show. I mean, you know, when we launched the show, so LinkedIn is a very influential platform for us, and you know, when we launched the show, I think I had, I don't know, somewhere around 1,800 connections, something like that. Now I think it's close to 25,000.
Holy moly!
Yeah, and the show, you know, our email list within Predictive, you know, at the time that we launched the show was a little over 3,000. Now it's like, you know, 33,000 plus. You know, email subscribers because of the show. And, you know, the show is now listened to in 102 countries. We've had, you know, we're getting close to 250,000 downloads. You know, so has it helped us build a nation of true fans? Absolutely. Because when we launched our book, it became, you know, a #1 bestseller in Amazon, or on Amazon, excuse me, in less than 18 hours. And that wouldn't happen if we didn't have a community that supported the book. So we feel extremely fortunate and very grateful for the amount of support that we have received, and as much of it as we have received. It's been awesome. It's taken obviously a lot of hard work, and we've taken a lot of feedback from our audience, and we do everything that they say because we want to get better every single day. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, it has been very, very powerful. You know, how our nation has supported us.
Let me ask you this, because you said that you have 25,000 followers on LinkedIn. What does that do to you? How does that help you as a business and a business owner?
Yeah, well, a couple of different ways. It helps from the distribution of content, right? So like if I am, you know, writing about a certain thing and I do some posts about that, then I know that it's going to get a certain number of views and visibility and whatnot. So all of that is good. But then also I know that if we need to generate leads for our service offerings and so forth, that's a fairly good sized pool from which to generate leads. So that's the second thing, and that's obviously good. And then the third piece is really kind of a credibility factor. Like you had asked me before, you know, we started recording, is it hard for us to find guests? You know, because we're up now to 800 episodes on the show. Is it hard to find guests? And praise God, it's not. And the reason why it's not is because we have a lot of social proof. We have 800 really, really good episodes that people can listen to. We've got thousands and thousands of people that we're connected to socially. And all of that stuff are like, you know, public dashboards of social proof. So if I invite somebody to be a guest on the show, they can go to our archive list and listen to, you know, episodes with, you know, some really great people and some people that they might already even know as friends or whatever, listen to those episodes. They can check me up on LinkedIn and like, holy cow, guy's got 25,000 connections. You know, I mean, you know, he didn't just fall off the turnip truck. You know, I mean, he knows some people. And so then it becomes a much easier yes to my invitation because of the social proof.
I just had somebody, actually 2 people in the last week on LinkedIn hit me up to ask if I wanted their help, quote, help, in promoting my podcast. And I just kind of threw the fishing line out there just to see what they're looking for and what they do. And they say they'll help to rank me #1. Have you ever done anything like that? Or is that, you know, considered to be taboo in the podcast business?
Okay. So give me that piece again.
Well, a couple of people have reached out and said, hey, I'd like to help you promote your podcast. And it's $5 a day or $50 a week or $200 a month to do that. I'm like, I don't have that kind of money. But I didn't know if it's something like doing something like that is taboo.
No, it's well, on the surface, is it taboo? Not necessarily. So no, it's not necessarily taboo, depending upon how it's being done. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody who's, making that kind of offer to you is legitimate. And so there are certainly some unscrupulous people that will just take your money. And so you need to be able to vet them. And anybody who says that, because we've had a few of those offers kind of come our way too, where they're like, we'll get you to the top of, Apple's podcast charts in iTunes, is that is an unscrupulous offer, because iTunes can't be rigged. It's about ratings, reviews, quality of content, how many downloads you're getting, that kind of stuff.
Right.
Are there ways to essentially use spiders and bots to fictitiously increase the number of downloads? Yes. Although that is getting harder and harder to rig today, thanks to some new standards being put into place by Libsyn, Google, Apple, and some others. So I think you just really have to be cautious. There is no quick fix to this. It is a long haul. We've been doing this now for 3.5 years. Our show has been live, and it just takes a long time of producing really good content consistently to build an audience. There's no magic formula to it. It's just a lot of hard work for a really long darn time.
Right, and I would have to agree with that. I just figured you'd be the person to ask about this, because I thought this seems way out of line. I haven't paid for any of that stuff ever, and I don't plan on doing it.
Right.
I do want to ask about, because you mentioned Libsyn, and there's Stitcher, there's Spreaker, there's iTunes, there's FM, there's 150,000 different places where your podcast can be RSS fed to off of your host. Does that all go toward the count of whatever your host is?
You mean as far as downloads?
Yeah.
Sort of. And the only reason I say sort of is because, right now, Onward Nation is available on 83 channels, I think, if I remember correctly, and a channel is like iTunes, Stitcher, Google, that kind of stuff.
Right.
Okay. So there's some really, really big ones that, represent the bulk of downloads, and there's a bunch of little ones where, you probably get a download or two a month. Anyway, but, we have Onward Nation hosted with Libsyn, and Libsyn is, and maybe you use Libsyn, but, I think they host, 25,000 different podcasts. I mean, it's just, it tends to be the go-to place. But Libsyn, as far as tracking, only really reports kind of the big channels. So like we can go in and see, well, how many downloads do we get from iTunes or Spotify or Stitcher or whatever. Mm-hmm. But as far as you might get the top 5, but it doesn't even report on like Alexa, because some of these smaller channels or newer distribution channels like Alexa don't report those numbers to Libsyn. So whatever we see in Libsyn for a total, like for a month, we multiply that by 1.5 to kind of account for the invisible downloads that are occurring.
Okay, I was wondering about that, because I also can get my podcast off Alexa, and
okay,
I'll tell you what, it was cool. And the first time that I did it, I'm like, that's really cool. And then the second time that I did it, the next month, I'm like, hey, that's really cool, and so on and so forth. But then I'm thinking, I looked at my numbers, and it doesn't show, that it would come from that. And then I look at some other stuff, like Sonos. I have Sonos, and I can't pick it, and the ones that I get off that don't count. And so I thought, well, people are listening, but there's got to be more people listening than just the numbers show.
Right.
Profitable podcasting. Is it possible to have a podcast that is profitable?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not possible to have a podcast that's profitable without the right strategy, and I think that's where most business owners go askew, because they think, I'm going to create a podcast and it's going to be about such and such topic. I'm going to interview a few people, or it's just going to be me, and then they're going to line up in droves to come talk to me. And my business is going to be overwhelmed because I'm a podcaster now, and I know that podcasting is hot. Yeah, and it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I don't mean to laugh because I'm like, yeah, it doesn't work that way at all.
No. And so, is it possible to have a profitable podcast? Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the aspects of the business that we're in. But before, clients sit down to start recording content or thinking about interviews or whatever, it's all about creating the right monetization strategy. How will the podcast drive their business forward? And that can't be ambiguous. It needs to be very, very clear. And if it's not clear, then it's just going to be a waste of time and money.
How do you get that clear, concise answer of why are you doing this?
Well, I think it starts with asking that question, but it's a process. In fact, so you mentioned my book, and so I believe it's in chapter 6 or 7 where I walk through the framework of an internal kickoff meeting and establishing what the success metrics are and what the goals are, and how we're going to measure success, of course, and so being able to define that early on before a Zoom recording or whatever takes place, understanding that, and then having a clear view of the guests and why have Stephen on your show or why have Bob on your show, and is there an opportunity to take our Dream 25 prospects and make them guests, and if so, how do we sell something downstream to them, and is it 2 months or 3 months or whatever. Mm-hmm. So it's being able to have a very clear strategy for monetization at the onset that determines whether or not the show is going to be successful. I came back from San Antonio a few days ago, and I was down there with one of our clients, and he said to me, he goes, Stephen, I've been running my show now for like 2.5 years or something like that, and shows generated over $1 million for me. That's awesome.
That is awesome.
But that didn't happen by accident. I mean, he's been very, very strategic, and we've helped along the way of making that happen, but it did not happen by accident. It was a strategy from the beginning. He didn't worry about monetizing for probably the first 6 months, but it doesn't mean that we weren't planning for it. And so it didn't happen by accident. It needs a plan. You have to be intentional about it, or it won't happen.
One of the questions I like to ask all of my guests, Stephen, is a failure that you may have had and how that turned to a positive.
Well, unfortunately, there's a lot of those to choose from. So I think probably the biggest and most public failure is actually another story that I cite in the book about my $2 million mistake and how we planned an event for January 2014 at the Ritz-Carlton in Orlando. I had signed a contract and I put $40,000 down, and I guaranteed 1,000 room nights, for 350 people for 3 nights. And for an all-inclusive event, I thought we'd sell 350 seats at $8,000 a piece. And, I had big time speakers, contracted to speak. Gary Vaynerchuk was going to be there. Darren Hardy from Success Magazine at the time, was going to be there. And several other very notable speakers, and thankfully all friends of mine, so that when we ended up having to cancel the event, which we did, nobody was, really upset at me. And so then, the mistake that I made was Darren was on our board of advisors at Predictive at that time. And whenever we were together in person or when we were on the phone together, he would always say to me, like every single month or every few weeks, he'd say to me, hey, why would somebody come to this event? Like if I'm Tom Schmuckatelli, why am I going to pay $8,000 to come to this event? And I'm like, why would you not? It's awesome. I mean, look where it's at. And, you're going to be there. And he's like, with all due respect, nobody cares. I mean, nobody cares that I'm going to be there. Nobody cares that, you need to work on this value proposition, who we're selling this thing to. And I continued to ignore that advice until it was too late. I mean, we opened the event for sale, and, on our big day of selling seats, we sold 3. And, you sell 3 seats for a room that seats 350. That looks weird. And so, 6 months out from the event, I had to cancel the event. And so, we lost $2 million in the revenue opportunity from all the ticket sales. But, more importantly, is, when you cancel an event within a 6-month window, I lost the $40,000 that I put into it already, that I had, already written checks to the Ritz-Carlton. But then afterwards, they're like, hey, gosh darn it, sorry that event didn't go. And here's a bill for $160,000, though, that you still owe us. Wow. And I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah, because, you cancel the event, but, so this is prorated. It's 50% of the room balance, so you still got to pay 50% of the room fee for beds that were never slept in and food that we didn't make. So I was able to negotiate that down to like $99,000, but it's $99,000 that the business had to pay. And so, that did not feel awesome. The lesson that I learned from that is, don't plan a big, massive event if you don't have the distribution channel, your own audience, a nation of true fans, and you have to get the avatar right. You have to understand the value proposition, why somebody is going to want to plunk down their American Express card for $8,000 plus travel. And we never figured it out, and it cost us a ton of money.
Would you try it again now?
Not at that scale. We're getting asked occasionally by clients and partners and that kind of stuff, hey, we should get together for a mastermind group. We should do this. We should do that. I'm just very, very cautious. So do I want to have like Onward Nation or Predictive ROI events again in the future? Sure. But I think they're going to be way smaller, less grandiose. And it's going to be like, I'm going to check with everybody, and say, okay, for this event to go, I need 50 people to put down deposits. Otherwise we're canceling it.
Right.
So I'm going to be much, much more cautious doing it next time.
Many years ago when you and I had conversation on the radio, you shared the story about a woman that basically defied the odds and rescued her baby. Would you share that story with us, please?
It's about why one person might care about something and another person doesn't. And so the story, I think I actually, Tony Robbins shared this with me. There were two like kind of warring tribes, if you will. And I think it was in Peru at the time. And one of the tribes lived down in the valley. Another tribe lived way up in the mountains, almost like unreachable. You could not get there. They knew like the secret paths and that kind of stuff. And so, one day the tribe that was way up in the mountains came down into the valley and start fighting with the tribe that's in the valley and whatnot. And so the folks who lived in the mountains decided to take some of the small children, and that's what they did. They carried them off, and so this woman who lost her newborn baby was, as anybody would imagine, distraught and terrified and horrified that this would happen, and she pled with all the men in the tribe to go rescue her child, and nobody would go. And you can't do it. It's the paths are, they're impassable, and the weather, and just a litany of excuses. And so everybody went back about their business and didn't see her kind of sneak off out of the valley. And she went up into the high mountain passes and whatever. And the next time that somebody saw her, she comes walking back into the village with her baby. And all these, men and leaders and whatever are just totally, absolutely mystified. Like, how were you able to do that? Like, how did they not kill you when you got there? And how did you get past the terrain and the weather and all of that? And she just looked at him and said, like we couldn't do that. How did you do it? And she just looked at him and said, not your baby. And the reality is that it's only you who really gets it. Like, if you're going to make this successful, if you are really going to achieve what it is that you want to achieve, it's you. Yes, you can have a great team around you. Absolutely. And they can be super committed. But if they don't see that commitment from you, it's your baby. And if you're not putting forth the effort, don't expect anybody else to, because it's your baby.
Stephen Woessner, my guest on the BS with Bob Schmidt podcast. Stephen, how does somebody go about finding you?
PredictiveROI.com is where all of our stuff is. So our podcast, all of our free resources, everything is there. The how to reach me is certainly there. You can find me on LinkedIn, of course. So those would probably be the two best ways.
The BS with Bob Schmidt podcast is brought to you by Orange Computer. Find them online at orangecomputerlax.com. And by Tri-State Sound and Light. Find them online at tristatesound.com. Tell your story with microcasts by podcastforhire.com. The BS with Bob Schmidt podcast is a podcast for hire production.